My best friend. Convinced my family I was a failure to steal my business. I'm Robert, I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how my childhood best friend betrayed me in the most vile way imaginable, but in the end, got exactly what he deserved. Before you think I'm one of those guys who exaggerates things or can't accept when someone is better than them, let me explain the full context. I grew up in a working-class family in Ohio. My dad owns an auto repair shop that he inherited from my grandfather, and my mum works as an accountant at a government office. We're not rich, but we're not lacking anything either. My best friend Derek and I met when we were 7 years old. We were neighbors and practically brothers. We spent our entire childhood and adolescence together. Street football, video games, pranks, first girlfriends, everything. When it came time to decide what to study in college, we both chose computer science. It was something we'd always loved since we were kids taking apart old computers that my uncle would give me. During college, Derek was always more charismatic than me. He was the typical guy who could convince anyone of anything, had a knack for networking, and always got along well with professors. I, on the other hand, was more shy but obsessive about programming. While he was at parties or networking events, I'd stay up until 3 a.m. perfecting code and learning new programming languages. When we graduated, we both got decent jobs at tech companies. But I had a bigger dream. I wanted to create my own software development company, specializing in solutions for small and medium-sized businesses. I had identified a market niche that was being ignored by the big tech companies. The problem was that I needed startup capital. Not much, but enough to rent a small office, buy equipment, and survive the first few months without guaranteed income. I calculated that I needed approximately $50,000 to start seriously. One Sunday afternoon during family dinner, I decided to present my business plan to my parents. I had prepared a detailed presentation on my laptop, market analysis, financial projections, list of potential clients I had already contacted informally, everything. "Dad, Mom," I began nervously, "I want to show you something important." I opened my laptop and started explaining my vision. I told them about how I had identified that medium-sized companies needed custom software but couldn't afford the solutions offered by large corporations. My proposal was to create tailor-made, efficient, and accessible solutions. My dad listened attentively, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Son," he said at the end, "that all sounds very nice, but you don't have experience running a business. It's one thing to be good at programming, and another completely different thing to handle clients, employees, finances." My mom nodded. "Besides, Robert, isn't it very risky? You have a stable job, good salary, why risk all that?" I explained that I wasn't going to quit immediately, that I could start the business working part-time until it was sustainable, but it was clear they weren't convinced. "We need to think about it, son," my dad finally said. 2 weeks later, I still hadn't received a definitive answer from my parents. That's when I decided to talk to Derek about my project. We were best friends. I thought maybe he'd want to be my partner or at least give me his support. "Are you seriously thinking about leaving your job to start a company?" he asked me with a smile that now, looking back, should have seemed suspicious. "Not immediately," I explained, "but yes, it's my dream. I think we can do something big." "Bro," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder, "I admire your ambition, but don't you think it's a bit naive? The business world is brutal. You need more than technical skills." His words hurt, but I thought he was just being realistic. After all, Derek had always been more pragmatic than me. What I didn't know was that that same week, Derek had begun regularly visiting my parents. At first, with innocent excuses, "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to say hi," or "I brought these cookies they gave me at work." My mom had always loved Derek like another son. In fact, she sometimes joked that he was more charismatic than me and wished I was more like him in that aspect. Those comments had always bothered me a little, but I never thought they were serious. During those visits, Derek subtly began planting doubts about my entrepreneurial capacity. "Aunt," he'd tell my mom, "I'm worried about Robert. I see him very obsessed with that business idea. Don't you think it's a bit unrealistic?" "Why do you say that, Derek?" "Well, Aunt, I work in the same sector as him. I know the market. Robert is brilliant at programming. Don't get me wrong, but creating a company requires skills. He simply doesn't have. He's very shy, doesn't know how to sell, has no contacts. I'm afraid he'll get into financial trouble chasing an impossible dream." My mum, worried, would tell my dad about these conversations. And Derek, very strategically, also began visiting my dad at the shop. "Mr. Charles," he'd say, "can I talk to you man-to-man about Robert?" My dad, who had always respected Derek's opinion, listened attentively. "Look, Mr. Charles, at the company where I work, I've seen many projects fail. Companies that had more capital, more experience, better connections than what Robert could have. Business failure can be devastating, not just financially, but emotionally. I've seen people who never recover." These conversations continued for weeks. Derek was very skillful. He never directly said I was incapable, but that he worried about my well-being, and that the timing wasn't right. A month after my initial presentation, my parents asked me to sit down and talk. "Son," my dad began, "we've been thinking a lot about your business proposal." My heart raced. Finally, they were going to give me an answer. "And the truth is, we don't think it's a good idea," my mom continued. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Look, son," my dad explained, "you're very good at the technical stuff. Nobody can deny that. But running a business is completely different. You have to deal with difficult clients, manage employees, handle legal problems, compete with established companies. Besides," my mom added, "what would happen if you fail? You'd lose your savings, possibly go into debt, and then what? Are you going to go back to looking for a job as an employee after being your own boss? Employers don't look kindly on that." "But I have a detailed plan," I protested. "I've studied the market, I have potential contacts." "Robert," my dad interrupted, "being optimistic is fine, but you also have to be realistic. 90% of startups fail in the first 2 years. Do you really want to bet your future on those odds?" I tried to argue, show them the projections again, explain that I had validated my idea with potential clients, but it was useless. Their decision was made. "I'm sorry, son," my mum concluded, "but we can't support you financially in this. It's too risky." What followed was even more painful. In the following months, every time I mentioned anything related to entrepreneurship or my business idea, my parents immediately changed the subject or made dismissive comments. "Still with that fantasy, Robert," my mum would say when I brought up the topic. "Son, better focus on your current job. That's where you have stability," my dad would add. But the worst were the constant comparisons with Derek. "Look at Derek, how well he's doing at his company. They already promoted him to supervisor," my mum would comment during family meals. "Derek does have his feet on the ground," my dad would say. "He knows how to value what he has." Derek, of course, was always present at these family gatherings, and I noticed how he smiled smugly every time my parents praised him and indirectly belittled me. "Robert should be more like you, Derek," my mum would tell him. "You're ambitious but realistic." "Oh, Aunt," Derek would respond with false modesty, "everyone has their strengths. Robert is brilliant at what he does." But he always added a but that ended up being crueler than any direct insult. But of course, the business world is different from the technical world. Not everyone is cut out for that. 6 months passed, and I was still working as an employee, feeling increasingly frustrated and resentful. My entrepreneurial dream seemed to have vanished, and my family acted as if they had saved my life by dissuading me from that madness. That's when Derek gave me the news that would finally break my heart. "Bro," he told me one Friday, after work, "I have something to tell you. I got some investors for a business project." I froze. "What kind of project?" "A software development company for SMEs," he replied, with a smile I now recognize as completely fake. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was exactly my idea, my market niche, my vision. "Derek," I managed to say with a trembling voice, "but that was my idea." "Your idea?" he laughed. "Bro, it's an obvious market. Anyone can see it. Besides, you never did anything about it. Because my family didn't support me." "Robert, you can't blame your family for not taking risks. Look, if you had really believed in your idea, you would have found a way. I found investors. You could have done it too." I felt betrayed and humiliated. My best friend had taken my idea and was executing it while I stood watching. At least would you give me a job at your company?" I asked, hating myself for sounding so desperate. "Sure, bro. When it's ready, I'll let you know if there's a position for you." The worst came after. Derek, of course, told my parents about his new company, and their reaction was exactly what he had calculated. "See," my mum told me during Sunday dinner, "Derek did know how to do things right. He got real investors, has a solid plan. It's the difference between dreaming and executing, my dad added. Derek has what it takes to be an entrepreneur. But Dad, I protested, it was my idea originally. Robert, my mom interrupted with exasperation, you can't claim ownership of an idea. Ideas are worthless if you don't execute them. Besides, my dad continued, seeing how Derek is handling all this confirms we made the right decision with you. Look at him. He already has an office, already hired employees, already signed his first contracts. In 6 months, he did what you've been talking about for years. Derek, present at that dinner as always, pretended to be uncomfortable with the situation. Uncle, Aunt, don't compare. Robert is excellent at what he does. Not everyone has to be an entrepreneur. But the smile in his eyes said something completely different. During the following months, my life became hell. I had to constantly hear about Derek's successes, how he had gotten a big contract, how he had expanded his team, how the investors were so happy they gave him more capital. My parents didn't even pretend subtlety in their comparisons anymore. Derek already bought a new car, my mom would comment. And he's looking for his own house, my dad would add. That's having vision for the future. I sank deeper and deeper into my resentment and self-pity. I began to believe that maybe they were right, that maybe I didn't have what it took to be an entrepreneur. It was by pure chance that I discovered the truth. One Saturday, I went to visit my Aunt Betty, my mom's sister, who lives in the same neighborhood as my parents. While we were having coffee, she asked me how I was doing. Fine, Aunt, working as always. Oh, nephew, it makes me very sad what happened with your company project. What do you mean, Aunt? Well, that your friend Derek stole your idea so shamelessly. My blood froze. What do you mean? Didn't you know? Your mom told me months ago how Derek had been visiting her, warning her about your lack of business skills, and how he had been considering that same market you wanted to attack. My mom told you that? Yes, sweetie. She told me Derek had been very smart in persuading them not to support you financially, because he had already seen the business potential and didn't want you to fail competing with him. The world collapsed on me. Aunt, are you sure about what you're saying? Of course, nephew. Your mom was very proud of Derek for being so considerate of you. She said it was better for him to take the idea because he had better chances of success, and that way you wouldn't lose money on a sure failure. I couldn't breathe. Everything began to make sense. Derek's constant visits to my parents, his concerned comments about my project, the speed with which he had gotten investors, the ease with which he had executed his idea. Aunt, I asked with a trembling voice, do my parents know that Derek stole my idea? Oh, nephew, he didn't steal it. He explained to them very clearly that ideas can't be stolen, that what matters is execution. And truth is, he's right. Look how well he's doing. I left my aunt's house in shock. All this time I had believed that my family simply didn't trust me, but it turned out they had been active accomplices in my betrayal. That same night, I went to confront my parents. Mom, Dad, we need to talk. What's wrong, son? I just found out that you knew from the beginning that Derek was going to execute my business idea. My parents looked at each other uncomfortably. Robert, my mom began, it's not how you're painting it. No? Then how is it? You didn't know Derek was betraying me. Son, my dad intervened, Derek never betrayed you. He saw a market opportunity, just like you. The difference is, he had the skills to execute it. It was my idea. Ideas don't belong to anyone, my mom replied. Derek had the courtesy to explain to us why your project would have failed. He saved us from watching you lose money and suffer worse humiliation. Courtesy? Courtesy? I exploded. You robbed me of my dream. Nobody robbed you of anything, my dad said firmly. Derek saved you from sure failure. You should be grateful to him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family had conspired against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was furious, betrayed, humiliated. But gradually that fury transformed into determination. If Derek thought he had destroyed me, he was very wrong. I began obsessively researching his company. I checked his social media, his website, his press releases, and I began to notice some interesting inconsistencies. First, his investors didn't appear registered in any public database. Second, his office was virtual. The address on his website was from a business center that rents offices by the hour. Third, his employees seemed to be freelancers who worked on specific projects. But the most interesting thing was when I discovered that his first big contract was with a company owned by his brother-in-law. I decided to do my own investigation. I began contacting potential clients in the same market niche, presenting myself as an independent consultant evaluating software options. In several conversations, I mentioned Derek's company to see what opinions they had. The results were revealing. 3 companies told me they had hired Derek, but had had terrible experiences. Projects delivered late, poorly written code that generated constant problems, non-existent technical support. Look, the IT manager of one of these companies told me, the guy sells very well, has a lot of smooth talk, but the quality of his work is terrible. We had to hire another developer to fix the mess he delivered to us. With this information, I began executing my plan. But I wasn't going to confront Derek directly. I was going to use the same tactics he had used on me. First, I began approaching his dissatisfied clients, offering my services to solve the problems Derek had caused. When my work pleased them, I asked for references and testimonials. Second, I began working part-time as a freelancer, using my real name and specializing in fixing systems poorly developed by other companies. Very strategically, I never mentioned Derek by name, but always documented the types of errors I corrected. In 6 months, I had accumulated enough success cases and references to have credibility in the market. Then I executed phase 2 of my plan. It turns out there's something I had never mentioned to my family, mainly because I never thought it was relevant. My paternal great-grandfather had been an immigrant who came to the United States in the early 20th century and had accumulated considerable fortune in real estate. My grandfather, being the youngest son, had inherited a relatively small part of that fortune, which consisted mainly of 2 commercial properties in downtown Cleveland. My dad inherited those properties when my grandfather died, but since they were in an area that had deteriorated, he had considered them almost worthless and never mentioned them. What nobody knew was that in recent years, that area had begun a process of gentrification and urban regeneration. The properties had increased in value exponentially. When I finally had them appraised by a professional valuator, I discovered they had a market value of approximately $800,000. I confronted my dad with this information. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? These properties were worth so much." "Because I didn't know, son. The last time I had them appraised was 15 years ago and they were worth almost nothing." "But Dad, haven't you noticed all the development that's happened in that area?" "Yes, but I never thought it affected our properties." I explained that with the value of those properties, I could not only finance my company, but I could start with a significant advantage over any competition. With financial backing secured, I went back to present my business plan to my parents. But this time it was different. This time I had capital. I had potential clients already identified. I had a team of reliable freelancers I had already worked with, and I had documented evidence of the quality of my work. "Dad, Mom," I told them in a family meeting, "I want to present something to you." This time my presentation included already signed contracts, testimonials from satisfied clients, and a detailed financial plan, backed by real assets. "Son," my dad said after the presentation, "this looks very different from what you showed us the first time. Because this time it's not just an idea, Dad, it's a business that's already working." My mom looked impressed but confused. "Why didn't you tell us before that you already had clients?" "Because I wanted to prove to you that I do have the necessary skills to do this." The following Sunday, during family dinner, my parents couldn't contain their excitement and told Derek about my new company. "Really?" Derek said, trying to hide his shock. "What kind of clients do you have?" Very calmly, I began mentioning company names. Several of them were Derek's dissatisfied clients who had hired my services to fix their systems. I saw how Derek's face went pale as he recognized the names. "Robert," my dad said proudly, "why don't you tell Derek about the contract with Lopez Industries?" Lopez Industries was Derek's biggest client, and it was also one of my most recent successes. They had hired my services after the system Derek had developed for them failed completely during an important audit. "Yes," I said, looking directly into Derek's eyes. "They hired me to develop a completely new system after their previous provider caused them very serious problems. They lost a lot of money because of poorly made software." Derek swallowed hard. What kind of problems?" "Oh, the typical amateur work, poorly structured code, lack of security validations, inefficient database. I had to rebuild everything from scratch." My mom interrupted. "Isn't it incredible, Derek? Robert is fixing other programmers' work. Incredible, Derek muttered. Update 1. 3 months passed, and the situation had completely reversed. My company was growing rapidly, mainly because I had a reputation for fixing problems that other developers caused. Derek, on the contrary, began having serious problems. His dissatisfied clients began talking to each other, and his reputation was deteriorating rapidly. The final blow came when he lost his biggest contract. Lopez Industries not only cancelled their contract, but threatened to sue him for damages caused by his defective software. Uncle-Aunt, Derek told my parents one afternoon, visiting them with a worried face. "I'm going through a difficult time in business." "What happened, sweetie?" my mom asked, genuinely concerned. "Some clients have had misunderstandings about the scope of my services." It was a lie, of course. Derek's problems weren't misunderstandings, but genuinely defective software. But he couldn't admit that without acknowledging his incompetence. "And what are you going to do?" my mom asked. "I'm considering maybe I need a partner. Someone to handle the technical part while I handle sales." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room. "Have you thought about talking to Robert?" my dad finally suggested. Derek's face cringed. It was obvious that was the last thing he wanted to do, but it was also obvious he was desperate. The following week, Derek looked for me after work. "Bro," he said with a forced smile. "Can we talk?" "Sure, what's up?" "Look, I've been thinking. My company is growing very fast, maybe too fast. I need help with the technical part." "And? Would you be interested in being my technical partner?" It took a lot of effort not to laugh in his face. "Your partner?" "Yes, bro, we could be a great team. I handle sales and administration, you handle development. 50-50 on profits." "Derek," I said, with the most serious face I could manage, "I appreciate the offer, but I already have my own company." "Yes, but think about it. Together we could dominate the market. My contacts, your technical talent." "Your contacts?" I couldn't help but ask. "You mean the clients who are cancelling contracts with you?" His face turned red. "Robert, those are just temporary misunderstandings." "Derek," I interrupted, "thanks for the offer, but I'm doing very well with my company. In fact, I'm so busy fixing other developers' defective work that I don't have time for new partnerships." The message was clear. Derek understood perfectly that I knew I was fixing his defective work. Update 2. 6 months later, my company had grown to a team of 8 people, and we had a waiting list of clients. I had achieved something Derek never could: build a solid reputation based on real quality, not just sales skills. That's when I decided it was time for the complete revelation. During a family dinner, with Derek present as always, I decided to share an interesting anecdote. "You know what's the most curious thing about my business?" I began casually. "What, sweetie?" my mom asked. "That approximately 60% of my clients come because they had bad experiences with another development company operating in the same area." "Really?" my dad said. "What kind of bad experiences?" "Oh, the typical exaggerated promises, poorly developed software, lack of support. It's sad because it gives the whole industry a bad reputation." Derek was visibly uncomfortable, but I continued. "In fact, I have several clients who have told me identical stories about the same company. Apparently there's a developer who's very good at selling, but terrible at executing." "How do you know it's the same company?" my mom asked, genuinely curious. "Because when I review the code they bring me to fix, it always has the same typical flaws, the same type of beginner errors, the same lack of documentation, the same security vulnerabilities." I looked directly at Derek. It's as if all those projects had been developed by the same person who really doesn't know what they're doing. Derek could no longer hide his nervousness. "Well, there are many bad developers in the market." "True," I continued, "but what strikes me most is that several of these clients have told me the salesperson was very charismatic, promised them the moon and stars, but when it came time to deliver, well, the result was a disaster." My dad frowned. "Sounds like fraud." "Not exactly fraud," I clarified. "More like incompetence sold as expertise. The problem is when you don't have real technical skills, you can fool 1 or 2 clients, but eventually reality catches up with you." The silence at the table was palpable. Derek avoided making eye contact with me. "In fact," I added, "one of my biggest clients hired me specifically after their previous provider caused them losses of almost $100,000 in a failed audit." My mom looked horrified. $100,000? Yes, imagine. The software they had developed had such basic flaws that when auditors reviewed it, they found security vulnerabilities that could have resulted in enormous fines. Derek finally spoke. Well, maybe we should change the subject. Why? I asked innocently. It's an interesting story about the industry. Yes, my dad added. I'm curious to know what company that is causing so many problems. Oh, I said, smiling. I'd rather not name names. It would be unprofessional of me. But the look I gave Derek made it very clear that he knew exactly which company I was talking about. After that dinner, Derek disappeared for several weeks. He didn't visit my parents again, didn't respond to my messages, nothing. I thought he had finally understood the message and would stay away permanently. But I was wrong. One Friday night, Derek showed up at my house. He looked terrible. Red eyes, wrinkled clothes, unshaven. We need to talk, he said when I opened the door. Come in. We entered my living room and he sat heavily on the couch. You ruined everything, he said without preamble. Excuse me? My company, my reputation, my clients. You ruined everything. Derek, I said calmly. I didn't ruin anything. I simply did my job. You knew exactly what you were doing. You stole my clients. I stole your clients? I laughed. Derek, they came to me because you gave them terrible service. It was my business idea. Your idea, I finally exploded. Your idea. It was my idea, Derek. You stole it from me. There was a tense silence. I know exactly what you did, I continued. I know how you convinced my parents that I didn't have the necessary skills. I know how you planted doubts in their minds while you planned to steal my business vision. Derek lowered his head. Robert, no, I interrupted. Now it's my turn to talk. For months, I believed I was incompetent, that my parents were right, that I didn't have what it took to be an entrepreneur. You made me doubt myself while you executed my business plan. But I had better connections, better sales skills. Better sales skills? I laughed bitterly. Derek, being a good salesman without having the product to back up. Your promises isn't skill, it's deception. It's not my fault clients had unrealistic expectations. Expectations that you created with your exaggerated promises. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then, with a broken voice, he asked me, What do you want? For me to apologize? To admit I was wrong? It's too late for apologies, Derek. So what? Are you going to completely destroy my life? I'm not destroying your life. The consequences of your actions are destroying it. He got up from the couch and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned and said, I hope you're proud of yourself. You know what, Derek? Yes, I am. For the first time in a long time, I'm proud of what I've achieved. That was the last time I spoke to him. Update 3. A year after that final confrontation, my company had consolidated as one of the most respected in our market niche. We had our own offices, a team of 15 people, and a client list that included some of the most important medium-sized companies in the city. Derek, on the contrary, had to close his company after facing 3 lawsuits for breach of contract and damages. The last I heard about him, he had gone back to working as an employee at an outsourcing company, earning less than what he earned before entrepreneuring. But the most satisfying thing wasn't my company's success or his failure. The most satisfying thing was the transformation in my family's attitude. Son, my dad said, during a family dinner, I have to apologize to you. Why, Dad, for not believing in you from the beginning, for doubting your abilities. My mom nodded. We were unfair to you, Robert. We let Derek convince us you didn't have what it took, and we were completely wrong. What I regret most, my dad added, is that we not only didn't support you, but we actively supported someone who was betraying you. It was the first time my parents openly acknowledged they had been accomplices to Derek's betrayal. You know something? I told them. In the end, I'm grateful for what happened. How can you be grateful for that? My mom asked. Because it forced me to prove to myself that I did have the necessary skills. If you had supported me from the beginning, maybe I never would have developed the determination and resilience I needed to succeed. 6 months ago, I had a chance encounter with Derek at a shopping mall. He was with what seemed to be his new girlfriend and her young child. When he saw me, he hesitated whether to approach or not. Finally, he walked toward me. Robert, he said with an uncomfortable smile. How are you? Very well, Derek. And you? Good, good. Working at a new company. I'm glad to hear that. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then his girlfriend stepped forward and whispered something in his ear. Derek nodded. "Robert," he said, I wanted to tell you I'm sorry about how things ended between us. It's okay, Derek, it's water under the bridge now. No, it's not okay. What I did was wrong. I betrayed you, and there's no justification for that. It was the first time he openly acknowledged his betrayal. I accept your apology, I said sincerely. Do you think someday we could be friends again? I thought about it for a moment. Derek, I can forgive you, but trust is lost forever. I don't think we can be friends like before. He nodded sadly. I understand. We said goodbye, cordially, and each went our separate way. Update 4. Today, 3 years after this whole situation, I can say my company is everything I dreamed it would be and more. We have 28 employees, offices in 2 cities, and we're considering expanding internationally. But more important than financial success is the lesson I learned about the importance of believing in yourself, even when those closest to you don't. I also learned that betrayals, although painful, are sometimes blessings in disguise. If Derek hadn't betrayed me, maybe I never would have developed the iron determination I needed to build something truly great. My parents are now my biggest fans. In fact, my dad retired early and now works with me as an advisor, contributing his business experience from the auto shop. My mom left her government job and now handles all the accounting for my company. It turns out her skills as an accountant were exactly what I needed for the growth I was experiencing. As for Derek, I occasionally hear news about him through mutual acquaintances. Apparently he's working at a stable company, earning a decent salary, and has stayed away from the entrepreneurial world. Maybe he finally understood that not all of us are made for the same thing. Do I regret my revenge? Not exactly. I didn't actively seek to destroy Derek. I simply focused on doing my job the best way possible. If that resulted in his dissatisfied clients coming to me, it was a natural consequence of the different quality of our work. The real revenge wasn't ruining his company. The real revenge was proving to him, to my family, and to myself that I did have everything necessary to be successful, that his betrayal didn't define me, but my response to that betrayal would. At the end of the day, success is the best revenge, and I definitely succeeded. Thanks for joining me on this incredible story of betrayal and revenge. What do you think? Do you believe my revenge was justified, or did I go too far? Have you experienced a similar situation with friends or family who betrayed you? If this story hooked you as much as it did me, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. And share this video with that person you know needs to hear a justice story like this. Right now, you have another video on screen with an equally intense story full of unexpected twists. Click and continue enjoying the best revenge and justice content on the channel. See you in the next video.